I also extend my deepest sympathies to the families of the UN foreign staff who were murdered during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Today we remember those 64 UN personnel that are honored on the commemorative stone erected on these grounds. They served the noble mission and values of the United Nations. We also gather to remember family members, colleagues, friends, neighbors, just human beings whose lives were shattered during the genocide against the Tutsi, because we don't commemorate the genocide. We don't commemorate a crime because no one wants to commemorate a crime. We commemorate the victims of that crime, those who were killed for who they were. In 1994, children became orphans, wives became widows, mothers saw their children die in their arms, patients were killed by doctors, students were killed by teachers. This rainy season of 1994 had transformed our country into a torrent of blood. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to pay tribute also to the brave UN peacekeepers who lost their lives during the genocide, and all those who fell in the line of duty. Today, we also honor the 10 Belgian paratroopers who left their families for a noble mission for the community of nations. They were killed on the very first day of the genocide while protecting the then Prime Minister of Rwanda, late Agathe Uwiringiyimana, who is honored in Rwanda as a hero. Ladies and gentlemen, the colleagues we remember today worked for the development of this country, for the common good, and for the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. The preamble of that charter remains as powerful today as it was first written, and I quote, "We the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and in the dignity and worth of the human person," end of quote. It is on days like these that we feel the full weight of those words. For genocide is the gravest crime known to humanity. It was to prevent such horrors that the world pledged never again in 1945 after the Holocaust. It was upon that pledge that the United Nations was founded as a community of nations committed to peace, human dignity, and human progress. Yet in 1994, that promise was broken. While debates were ongoing in New York over terminology and whether or not to intervene, thousands of Tutsis were being massacred each day in Rwanda. Here in Kigali, while the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda, UNAMIR, was stripped of the means to protect civilians, Tutsis were hunted across the country, including members of the mission's own local staff. Retired Lieutenant General Romeo Dallaire later described, as Fatmata said, described the genocide as a failure of humanity, the very humanity the UN Charter was created to defend. And yet, even in that darkest hour, there were individuals who chose courage over indifference and humanity over fear. I would like to particularly honor Captain Bai Diang of Senegal, who alone saved up to 1,000 Tutsis during the genocide, defying orders from New York before paying, as a dignified human being, the ultimate sacrifice. He was posthumously decorated by Rwanda in July 2010. And in May 2014, the UN Security Council established the Captain Bai Diang Medal for Exceptional Courage, a medal that is given to those who demonstrate exceptional courage in the face of extreme danger. Within UNAMIR itself, some also distinguished themselves through extraordinary bravery, saving thousands of lives. In this respect, I wish to pay tribute to the Ghanaian contingent for their bravery. I particularly thank Major General Henry Kwame Anyidoho and Major General Joseph Nar Andinkra of Ghana, who were honored in 2022 for their courage with the National Order of Bravery Medal. On 11th of April this year, a memorial was even erected by the Ashesi University in Ghana to honor the victims of the genocide against the Tutsi and to pay tribute to the Ghanaian contingent in Rwanda. At the Security Council in New York, there were also diplomats who spoke with moral clarity when many others, including the powerful members of the Council, did not. Those are Ambassador Colin Keating of New Zealand, Ambassador Karel Kovanda of the Czech Republic, and Professor Ibrahim Gambari of Nigeria. Those ambassadors were all later awarded the Umurinzi Campaign Against Genocide medal in 2010 by His Excellency the President of the Republic. Ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda appreciates the positive role of the United Nations in the unity and socio-economic transformation of Rwanda over the last 32 years. Rwanda also appreciates the efforts of the United Nations in learning from mistakes of the past. In 2005, during the World Summit marking the 60th anniversary of the organization, the principle of the responsibility to protect, R2P, was established. As a matter of fact, Rwanda served for more than a decade as the co-chair of the group of friends of the R2P in New York, first with Norway and later with the Netherlands. Similarly, Rwanda commends the United Nations for creating the Office of the Special Advisor on the Responsibility to Protect and that of the Special Advisor of the Prevention of Genocide within the Office of the UN Secretary General. However, as the United Nations marked its 80th anniversary last year, that milestone remains both a celebration of achievements and a reminder of unfinished responsibility. Indeed, although the genocide against the Tutsi occurred 32 years ago, attempts to minimize it, to distort it, or deny it altogether still persist. Yet, in September 1998, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, in its first and landmark Akayesu judgment, clearly established that a crime of genocide was perpetrated in Rwanda against the Tutsi ethnic group. That was in 1998. This was confirmed by the ICTR judicial notice of June 2006, which recognized the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi as a fact of common knowledge, ending any legal debate on the terminology. Later on, in April 2020, the UN General Assembly designated April 7th as the International Day of Reflection of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And in the same resolution, the General Assembly further condemned without reservation any denial of the genocide. Nonetheless, despite the fact that the genocide against the Tutsi is a crime established by a UN tribunal and recognized by the UN General Assembly, we regret that it is still denied to this day. We particularly regret that even some UN member states resisted the adoption of the correct terminology, thereby fueling genocide denial in academic, government, and political cycles. Ladies and gentlemen, in 1994, Rwanda chose the path of unity, reconciliation, and progress. However, on the other side of our western border, the army and militias that committed genocide were never disarmed. Worse still, they were allowed to operate freely and regularly attack our country, committing ethnic-based massacres like that of Nyanje in 1997. Over the last 3 decades, Genocidal militias like the FDLR have found fertile ground in DRC for their genocide ideology. They have been supported, armed, and embedded by the DRC government and security apparatus. In this regard, one should ask a simple question. How is it possible that a UN sanctioned group responsible for a genocide established by a UN tribunal and recognized by the UN General Assembly is allowed to operate across Rwanda's border for more than 3 decades in full view of the very international community that pledged never again, and in the presence of a UN force that is deployed on the ground for more than a quarter century? As a result of the presence of these armed groups, ethnic violence has continued to soar in eastern DRC. State-sponsored hate speech against the Congolese Tutsi, including the Banyamulenge, has been voiced by senior government officials on official platforms using the same language, the same words, the same codes as those of the period preceding the genocide in '94. Rwanda therefore calls on the United Nations not to fail this region once again, but to stand firmly against hatred, injustice, and the seeds of genocide. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to conclude by reaffirming the importance of remembrance. A few years ago, His Excellency the President reminded us that we should remember the past, but also remember the future that we had committed to, a future of unity and renewal. As we remember to keep alive the flame of hope, we should also speak up against hate, against racism, against anti-Semitism, against discrimination, against persecution, and most importantly, we should speak up against the indifference of those who are in the capacity to act. Let me thank once again the UN Resident Coordinator and the UN Rwanda leadership for organizing this important commemoration. As we continue to honor our loved ones in these 100 days of Kwibuka, let us continue to remember, unite, and renew. I thank you.